They thought it'd be a hilarious life lesson to leave me behind on vacation. "You'll learn responsibility," my aunt proclaimed, tossing me $30 and driving away. I was 19. I didn't argue. I just got in a taxi. 14 years later, they walked into my firm's reception, desperate for assistance. I didn't even stand. I simply stated, "Security will escort you out." I, 33M, learned a hard lesson about family loyalty when I was 19. What I didn't expect was to teach one back 14 years later. It was supposed to be a family vacation to the lake house. My aunt had been planning it for months, talking about how we all needed to reconnect and spend quality time together. My cousins were excited, my parents seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years, and even I was looking forward to getting away from the city for a week. The morning we were supposed to leave, I overslept. Not by much, maybe 20 minutes passed when my aunt said we'd gather at her place. I rushed over with my bag, expecting to find everyone loading up the cars and maybe dealing with some good-natured ribbing about being late. Instead, I found empty driveways and a note taped to the front door with my name on it. My aunt had written that they decided to leave without me. She explained that this would be a perfect opportunity for me to learn responsibility and time management. There was $30 taped to the note and a suggestion that I use this experience to reflect on my priorities. The whole family had apparently agreed this would be good for me. I stood there reading that note 3 times before it really sank in. They had planned this. While I was rushing to get ready, they were already on the road, probably laughing about their clever teaching moment. My phone had several missed calls from my mom, but when I called back, it went straight to voicemail. I tried my dad, my cousins, even my uncle. Nothing. The taxi driver who picked me up was an older guy who seemed to sense something was off. He asked where I was headed, and I honestly didn't know. I gave him my address and spent the ride staring out the window, trying to process what had just happened. He didn't charge me the full fare, said I looked like I was having a rough morning. I tipped him the extra few bucks anyway. That week alone in my apartment was strange. I kept expecting someone to call, maybe to apologize or at least check if I was okay. The silence was deafening. When they finally returned, my mom called to ask if I had learned anything from the experience. I told her I had, though I don't think she understood what I meant. The distance that started that day never really closed. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where everyone acted like nothing had happened. I started declining invitations, making excuses about work or other commitments. They seemed relieved, honestly. It was easier for everyone to pretend that everything was normal if I wasn't there reminding them of their little stunt. I threw myself into school after that. Business administration with a focus on corporate law. The work was demanding, but I found I liked the structure and logic of it. Success became measurable in grades, then internships, then job offers. It was cleaner than family relationships, more predictable. After graduation, I landed a position at a mid-sized consulting firm. The hours were brutal, but the learning curve was steep and rewarding. I was good at identifying inefficiencies, at seeing problems that others missed. Within 3 years, I was managing my own accounts. Within 5, I was a partner. The decision to start my own firm came during a particularly frustrating quarter when upper management killed a project I'd spent months developing. I had enough savings, enough contacts, and enough frustration to make the leap. The first year was rough, working out of a cramped office with 2 employees and more ambition than sense. But we were solving real problems for real companies, and word traveled fast in our industry. By year 3, we had moved to a proper office building. By year 5, we occupied 2 floors. The firm specialized in corporate restructuring and crisis management. When companies found themselves in trouble, usually due to poor planning or mismanagement, they called us. We were good at cleaning up messes that others had made. Success felt different than I had expected. The financial security was nice, obviously, but what I really enjoyed was the respect. Clients listened when I spoke. My opinions carried weight. The scared 19-year-old reading that note had grown into someone who commanded attention in boardrooms. I rarely thought about my family anymore. Occasional updates filtered through mutual acquaintances, but we had effectively become strangers. My aunt had divorced and was apparently struggling financially. My cousins had their own families and problems. My parents had retired to Florida and seemed content with their distance from everyone. The morning they walked into my office, I was reviewing quarterly reports with my senior staff. My assistant knocked and informed me that some people were in reception claiming to be family members who needed to speak with me urgently. The name she mentioned made my stomach drop. I told my team to take a break and walked out to the reception area. There they were, looking older and smaller than I remembered. My aunt appeared nervous, constantly adjusting her purse strap. My uncle stood slightly behind her, clearly uncomfortable. My parents looked around the office with expressions I couldn't quite read. My aunt started talking as soon as she saw me, explaining that they needed help with some legal troubles. Something about a business dispute and potential bankruptcy. She mentioned how proud they were of what I had accomplished and how they always knew I would be successful. The words came out in a rush, like she had rehearsed them. I let her finish before responding. I told them that our firm doesn't take on cases like theirs, which was true. We dealt with larger corporations, not small business disputes. But even if we did, I explained, there would be a conflict of interest given our family relationship. My uncle suggested that surely family could work something out, maybe bend the rules a little. He reminded me that family looks out for each other, that blood is thicker than water. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who had shaped my understanding of what family meant. My aunt, who had orchestrated that morning 14 years ago, now standing in my office asking for favors. My parents, who had gone along with abandoning their son, now expecting that same son to solve their problems. I told them I understood their situation was difficult, but that I couldn't help them. My aunt's face changed then, shifting from nervous hope to something harder. She reminded me of all the times they had been there for me growing up, all the family dinners and birthday parties and holidays. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was being so unreasonable. That's when I mentioned the lake house trip. I asked if she remembered the lesson about responsibility she thought I needed to learn. The room went quiet. My parents suddenly found the floor very interesting. My uncle cleared his throat uncomfortably. My aunt tried to dismiss it as ancient history, saying that was just a silly misunderstanding from years ago. She insisted that it had nothing to do with their current situation and that I was being petty to bring it up. But I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what it had to do with everything. I explained that they had taught me something valuable that day, though perhaps not what they intended. They had shown me that family isn't about unconditional support or loyalty. It's about choosing who deserves your time and energy based on how they treat you. They had made their choice about what kind of family we were going to be. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but the outcome was inevitable. I called security and asked them to escort my family out of the building. I returned to my office and closed the door, telling my assistant to hold all calls for the rest of the afternoon. Update 1. The confrontation in my office happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, my phone was ringing constantly. Extended family members, friends of my parents, even old high school acquaintances were reaching out to tell me I was being unreasonable. The story, as they heard it, was that successful nephew was refusing to help family in crisis over some minor childhood disagreement. I let most of the calls go to voicemail, but I did answer when my cousin called. She had always been the most level-headed person in our family, and I was curious to hear her perspective. She acknowledged that what happened at the lake house was wrong, but she argued that 14 years was long enough to hold a grudge. She pointed out that our aunt was facing serious financial difficulties and that I was in a position to help. I asked her if she would have made the same choice they did that morning. She was quiet for a long time before admitting she didn't know, but that dwelling on past mistakes wasn't healthy for anyone. I appreciated her honesty, but it didn't change my position. The pressure campaign continued for several weeks. Someone had apparently shared my office address, because flowers and cards started arriving with messages about forgiveness and second chances. A few letters were less diplomatic, questioning my character and suggesting that success had made me cold and vindictive. What bothered me most wasn't the criticism itself, but how completely they missed the point. This wasn't about holding grudges or being vindictive. It was about recognizing patterns of behavior and making decisions based on that recognition. They had shown me who they were when I was 19 and vulnerable. Why would I expect them to be different now that I was 33 and successful? Update 2. 3 months after the office incident, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that my aunt had lost her business. The legal troubles she had mentioned were apparently more serious than she had let on, involving some questionable bookkeeping practices that had attracted attention from tax authorities. My uncle had suffered a minor heart attack, likely stress-related, and they were facing the possibility of losing their house. Part of me felt bad about their situation. These weren't evil people, just flawed ones who had made poor decisions at various points in their lives. But feeling bad about someone's circumstances isn't the same as feeling obligated to fix them, especially when those circumstances are largely self-created. I did some research into their legal situation, partly out of curiosity and partly to make sure I had made the right choice in refusing to help. What I found confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a simple business dispute or an unfortunate misunderstanding. There were years of financial mismanagement, tax evasion, and what appeared to be deliberate fraud. Any lawyer who took their case would be walking into a nightmare. My parents called one more time, about 6 months after the office visit. My mother sounded tired and older somehow. She told me that my aunt and uncle were moving in with them temporarily, that they had nowhere else to go. She didn't ask me to reconsider helping them, but there was an expectation in her voice that I would offer something. I told her I was sorry to hear about their difficulties, and I meant it. But I also made it clear that my position hadn't changed. She seemed to understand, though she didn't sound happy about it. Before hanging up, she mentioned that she sometimes wondered if they had handled things differently when I was younger, whether our family would be closer now. I told her that we all make choices and live with the consequences. Sometimes those consequences take longer to materialize than we expect, but they always come eventually. She was quiet for a moment before agreeing and saying goodbye. Update 3. It's been 2 years since my family walked into my office, and life has settled into a new normal. My firm continues to grow. We've expanded into 3 more cities, and I'm busier than ever. The work remains challenging and rewarding, providing the kind of structured success that family relationships never offered me. I occasionally hear updates through the small network of mutual connections that still exists. My aunt and uncle declared bankruptcy and are living in a small apartment now. My uncle's health has stabilized, but they're both in their 70s and struggling financially. My parents are helping as much as they can, but their retirement savings were never designed to support 4 people. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Not about refusing to help with their legal troubles. That decision was clearly correct. But about cutting ties so completely, about letting that 19-year-old's hurt define so many adult relationships. There's a difference between protecting yourself and hardening your heart, and I'm not always sure which side of that line I'm on. Last month, I was having lunch with a client who mentioned that his brother had asked him for money to cover some business debts. He was torn between wanting to help family and knowing that his brother had a history of poor financial decisions. I found myself advising him to be very careful about enabling destructive patterns, to consider whether his help would actually solve problems or just postpone them. After lunch, I realized I was giving advice based on my own experience, applying lessons learned from that morning at my aunt's house. The difference was that my client's brother had never deliberately hurt him, never orchestrated a cruel lesson or abandoned him when he needed support. Their situation was fundamentally different from mine, even though the surface circumstances were similar. That distinction matters. What happened to me wasn't just about money or legal troubles or business disputes. It was about a family that decided to teach me a lesson through abandonment and humiliation, then expected me to forget that lesson when it became inconvenient for them. They created the distance between us, not through a single mistake, but through a deliberate choice that revealed their values and priorities. I don't regret my decision to refuse their request for help, but I've started to understand that carrying that hurt for so many years changed me in ways I didn't fully recognize. It made me more successful professionally, more self-reliant and focused, but it also made me less trusting and perhaps less generous than I might have been otherwise. The 19-year-old who got left behind at that house learned that family isn't always safe, that people who claim to love you might hurt you deliberately if they think it serves a purpose. The 33-year-old who faced them in his office had built a life around that lesson, creating success and security that no one could take away or use as a teaching tool. Now, at 35, I'm starting to think that maybe the real lesson isn't about family at all. Maybe it's about recognizing that people reveal who they are through their actions and believing them when they do. My family showed me who they were that morning. I built my life accordingly. When they asked for my help, I responded based on what they had taught me about themselves and about how they viewed our relationship. I still think I made the right choice. But I also think that carrying anger for 14 years, even justified anger, extracts its own price. I'm working on figuring out how to maintain appropriate boundaries without maintaining the emotional charge that comes with old hurt. It's harder than I expected, but it feels like important work. The security guard who escorted them out that day asked me afterward if I was okay. I told him I was fine, that it was just some people who were confused about what kind of help we provide. He nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Professional boundaries are clean that way, clearly defined and mutually understood. Family boundaries, I'm learning, are messy but equally necessary. The difference is that with family, you have to create them yourself, and you have to be prepared to enforce them even when it costs you something. Especially then,